I have worked a lot of dead-end jobs in my life. I think most people have when they are young and broke. I have scrubbed dishes in kitchens where the rats were bolder than the chefs, scurrying across the floor mats while we sprayed down the grease traps. I have moved furniture in the dead of summer, lugging solid oak dressers up 3 flights of narrow stairs until I passed out from heat stroke. I have walked dogs for rich people who treated the animals better than they treated their own children. But the job that actually made me leave the city, the one that still makes me check the locks on my windows 3 times a night before I can even close my eyes, was running a hot dog cart in the industrial district. It was the fall of 2018. I was a sophomore in college, drowning in tuition fees and living off instant noodles and panic. I was desperate for cash. I found this listing on Craigslist for a night vendor position. The ad was vague, barely 2 sentences long, but the pay was suspicious. It was double the minimum wage plus tips, and the ad explicitly stated it was all paid in cash at the end of every week. The catch, which I didn't realize until I went for the interview, was the location and the hours. They wanted me set up from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. on a street that was basically just abandoned warehouses, rusted chain-link fences, and an old, condemned grain silo that towered over the block like a massive tombstone. My boss was a guy named Sal. I met him in a diner parking lot to get the keys. He was a greasy, nervous man who smelled like old fryer oil and stale cigarettes. He didn't look me in the eye when he spoke. Sal told me the spot was a high-traffic area for shift workers, coming off the line at the nearby textile plant. He said they get hungry on the graveyard shift, and there were no other food options for miles. I needed the money so bad that I did not question the logic. I didn't ask why a textile plant would have workers walking out at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I just took the keys to the cart and the propane tank and thanked him. The first week was boring. Extremely, painfully boring. The high traffic Sal promised was a complete lie. I stood there in the freezing cold, smelling like boiled hot dog water and onions, staring at the cracked pavement for hours. The wind would whip down the alleyways, rattling the corrugated metal sidings of the warehouses. Occasionally, a factory worker would walk by and grab a soda, or a stray dog would come sniffing around the wheels, looking for scraps. But mostly, it was just me and the hum of the flickering streetlights. The silence in that part of the city was heavy. It felt like the air was thicker there, pressed down by the weight of all that concrete and rusted steel. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring. Things changed on a Tuesday. I remember the night perfectly because I had a midterm the next morning that I was trying to study for by the light of the heat lamp. It was around 3 a.m. The street was dead silent. No cars, no wind, not even the distant sound of a siren, which is rare for the city. I was leaning against the cart, scrolling through my phone and trying to ignore the damp cold seeping into my boots. Then I heard a sound. It was distinct. It was the sound of heavy metal grinding against concrete, a screeching, agonizing noise that echoed off the brick walls around me. I looked up, startled. Across the street, about 50 yards away, was the condemned grain silo. It was a massive, cylindrical structure, stained black from decades of soot and neglect. The area around it was fenced off with signs that said, "Danger," and nitrogen monoxide trespassing, and keep out. But the heavy metal door at the base of the silo, a door that looked like it hadn't been opened since the 80s, was pushing open. I froze. That building had been sealed for years. I watched, expecting a security guard, or maybe a squatter to stumble out, maybe some kids looking for a place to drink. Instead, 3 people walked out, 2 men and a woman. They were not shift workers. They were not homeless. They were dressed in formal wear. I am talking pristine black tuxedos with tails, boadies, the works. The woman was wearing a floor-length, shimmering silver evening gown that dragged slightly on the dirty concrete, in the middle of a grime-covered industrial park, in the middle of the night. They did not look like they had been partying. Their clothes were not rumpled. Their hair was perfect, slicked back and neat. They looked like they had just stepped out of a high-end ballroom or a gala. My heart started hammering against my ribs. It was such a jarring sight that my brain could not process it. It felt like a glitch in reality. I put on my customer service smile, thinking maybe they were lost. Maybe they came from a wedding venue I didn't know about and took a wrong turn. They walked in a perfect line toward my cart. They moved in sync, their footsteps clicking rhythmically on the asphalt. They didn't look around at the garbage or the rats. They locked eyes on me. They stopped exactly 5 feet away from the cart. They did not come closer. They just stood there. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. "Good evening," I said, my voice shaking a little more than I wanted it to. "Can I get you folks something to eat? Hot dog? Pretzel?" They did not answer. They did not even blink. They just stared at me. Their faces were blank. I do not mean they had neutral expressions. I mean they looked empty. There was no light in their eyes, no curiosity, no hunger. They looked at me the way you look at a lamp or a television screen. I was just an object to them. Their skin was pale, almost waxy under the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights. I asked again, thinking maybe they didn't hear me. "Soda? Water?" Silence. The woman in the silver gown tilted her head slightly to the left, like a bird inspecting a worm, but her eyes never left my face. The two men stood with their hands clasped behind their backs, rigid as statues. They weren't breathing hard. They weren't shivering in the cold. They stood there for exactly 10 minutes. I know it was 10 minutes because I kept glancing at my watch, terrified that if I looked away from them, they would lunge at me. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life. I gripped the handle of my bread knife under the counter, my knuckles turning white. I ran through scenarios in my head. If they jump the counter, do I run? Do I fight? Who are they? Then, without a word, without a signal I could see, they all turned around at the exact same second. It was choreographed, like soldiers. They walked back across the street, stepped into the dark void of the silo, and pulled the heavy iron door shut behind them. I was shaking so bad I could barely lock up the cart that night. I drove home in a daze, constantly checking my rearview mirror. I told Sal about it the next day when I went to pick up more buns. He just laughed, wiping his hands on his apron. "Probably just art students doing some performance piece," he said, not looking up. "Weirdos are everywhere, kid. Just sell the dogs. As long as they don't hassle you, who cares?" But they did not look like students. They looked older. They looked wealthy. And they didn't look like they were acting. They came back the next night. Same time, 3 a.m. sharp. This time, there were 5 of them. The original 3, plus 2 more men in suits. They did the same thing. They walked out of the silo, marched up to the cart, and formed a semicircle 5 feet away. They stared. I tried to ignore them. I tried to focus on cleaning the mustard bottles, on counting the inventory, on anything but those 10 dead eyes drilling into me. But I could feel their gaze physically. It felt predatory. It felt like I was an animal in a zoo exhibit, and they were the patrons studying me, waiting for me to do something interesting. I tried talking to them again. "Look, guys, if you aren't buying anything, you're freaking me out." Nothing. Not a twitch. After exactly 10 minutes, they turned in unison and left. This went on for 2 weeks. The group got bigger every single night. It became a ritual. By the second Friday, there were 15 people standing in the dark, watching me. Men in tails, women in velvet gowns, an old woman with a pearl necklace that must have cost more than my tuition. They never spoke. They never bought anything. They just emerged from that rotting building, watched me for 10 minutes, and vanished. I stopped bringing my homework. I stopped looking at my phone. I spent my entire shift in a state of hyper-awareness, waiting for 3 a.m. The anxiety was eating me alive. I started parking my car closer to the cart, leaving the engine running, just in case. I bought pepper spray. The breaking point was that Saturday. It was storming violently. Heavy rain sheets were coming down, and thunder was shaking the ground. The wind was howling, whipping wet trash down the street. I was huddled inside the small awning of the cart, miserable and soaked, shivering in my jacket. I thought, surely they won't come out in this. Nobody goes out in this weather unless they have to. I was wrong. At 3 a.m., through the pouring rain, the silo door groaned open. A man I had not seen before walked out. He was different from the others. He was older, much older. His skin was pale and papery, like old parchment that had been left in the sun. He was wearing a suit that looked like it was cut in the 1920s wide lapels, thick wool, a style you only see in history books. He did not stop at the 5-foot mark. He walked right up to the cart. The rain was soaking him, plastering his thin gray hair to his skull, water running down his face in rivets, but he did not blink. He did not shiver. He walked until his chest was pressing against the metal front of my stand. He leaned over the counter. I was paralyzed. I could smell him. He did not smell like rain. He smelled like wet earth and old copper, the smell of a basement full of pennies, or maybe dried blood. It was a smell of decay, masked by something sweet like formaldehyde. His eyes were milky, almost like he had cataracts, but he looked right into my soul. I gripped the knife under the counter so hard my hand cramped. I thought, this is it. I am going to die over a hot dog cart in the rain. I held my breath, waiting for him to grab me. He reached into his breast pocket. My heart stopped. I thought he was pulling a gun. I braced myself for the flash. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled, wet piece of paper. He placed it gently on the metal counter. His fingers were long and skeletal, with nails that were yellow and thick, curved slightly like claws. He leaned in close. His face was inches from mine. I could see the pores in his gray skin. "Leave," he whispered. His voice sounded like dry leaves crunching underfoot. It was raspy, unused. "Don't be here tomorrow." He turned and walked back to the silo. The rest of the group, at least 20 of them now, were waiting by the door in the rain, soaking wet in their finery. They all filed inside and slammed the iron door shut. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my throat. I looked down at the paper. It was a photograph, a Polaroid. My blood turned to ice. It was a picture of me. I was asleep in my bed in my apartment. My mouth was slightly open, my arm hanging off the side of the mattress. The angle of the photo was taken from inside my closet, looking out through the slats of the closet door. Someone had been in my room while I slept. I did not pack up the cart. I did not turn off the propane. I ran to my car, jumped in, and peeled out of there. I drove straight to my apartment, grabbed my essentials, threw my clothes in a bag, and drove to my parents' house 3 states away without stopping. I kept checking the back seat, convinced the old man was going to pop up. I did not sleep for 2 days. Every shadow looked like a tuxedo. Every noise sounded like that metal door dragging open. I never went back for my last paycheck. I blocked Sal's number. A week later, I saw a news story online. A massive fire had gutted that entire industrial block. The grain silo had collapsed in on itself. The police report said they found organic remains in the basement levels of the silo bones. Lots of them, but they could not identify who they belonged to because the heat had been so intense. They said it looked like people had been living down there for decades. I do not know what was in that silo. I do not know who those people were or why they dressed like that, but I know they were watching me long before I took that job. I live in a different state now. I work in an office with bright lights and lots of people. But sometimes, when I am walking home at night and the street is quiet, I can smell wet earth and copper, and I know I have to start running. My buddy Lisa and I had a dream. It's the same dream a lot of guys have. We wanted to be our own bosses. We poured our entire life savings, and I mean every single cent we had, into El Fuego, our food truck. We had grand visions of working music festivals, parking outside busy breweries, and seeing lines of people wrapped around the block waiting for our signature tacos. We thought we were going to be the next big thing in the city food scene. The reality was grim. We were barely making rent on the truck. The generator was constantly dying and needing expensive repairs. And we were eating our own inventory just to survive because we couldn't afford groceries. We were 2 months away from bankruptcy and losing everything. So when the email came through, it felt like a lifeline from God. The subject line was simple: urgent, private event catering. The offer was staggering: $5,000 for 6 hours of service. All they wanted was tacos. $5,000 for tacos. That would cover our rent for 3 months. We didn't even care where it was. We would have driven into an active volcano for that kind of money. The location was a pin drop on a digital map. It wasn't an address, just coordinates. It was deep in the sprawling farmland, about 2 hours north of the city, way past where the suburbs end and the real wilderness begins. The instructions were specific: arrive by 6 p.m. Do not bring outside meat. High-quality protein would be provided by the host. That was a little weird, sure. Usually, we prep our own pork and beef. It's part of our brand. But we figured some rich people are particular about their organic, grass-fed Wagyu or whatever. Maybe they hunted their own game. We shrugged it off. $5,000 is $5,000. We drove out there on a Saturday. The sun was blazing when we left the city, but as we headed north, the clouds rolled in, heavy and gray. The paved roads turned to gravel, and the gravel eventually turned to a narrow dirt track that barely fit the truck. The trees got thicker, taller, blocking out the late afternoon sun until it felt like twilight at 4 p.m. We lost cell service about 20 minutes before we reached the pin. Luis was driving. He looked at me, tapping the steering wheel nervously. "Bro, this feels sketchy," he said, checking the side mirror. "We are in the middle of nowhere. What if this is a setup? What if they rob us?" I told him to relax, even though I was feeling the exact same knot in my stomach. "Rob us of what, Luis?" "The truck is worth more as scrap metal, and we have $12 in the cash register. It's fine. It's probably some eccentric millionaire wanting a forest party." When we finally pulled up to the coordinates, my stomach dropped. I was expecting a farmhouse, a barn wedding, maybe a glamping setup with fairy lights and a DJ. There was nothing. Just a clearing in the woods with a single large white tent set up in the center. It looked like a medical tent or something you'd see at a crime scene. No cars, no lights, no music, just the forest wall surrounding us on all sides, the trees looming over us. A man stepped out of the tent. He was tall, gaunt, and wearing a pristine white apron over a very expensive-looking black suit. He waved us over. We parked the truck. The silence was deafening. No birds, no crickets. Just the sound of the engine ticking as it cooled down. The man introduced himself as Mr. Blackwood. He was polite, almost too polite. His smile was tight, practiced. It did not reach his eyes. His eyes were dead, flat things that tracked our movements like a hawk. He told us the guests would be arriving shortly from a hunting excursion in the woods, and they would be ravenous. He pointed to a large industrial cooler sitting by the tent entrance. "The meat is in there," Blackwood said, his voice smooth and deep. "Please start prepping immediately. I like it rare, very rare. Don't overcook it." He turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing into the tree line like a ghost. He didn't use a flashlight. He just walked into the pitch black. Luis and I looked at each other. "Okay," I said, trying to break the tension. "Let's just get this done. Fire up the grill." We hauled the cooler into the truck. We opened it. Inside were large, vacuum-sealed bags of red meat. It looked fresh, really fresh. There was still blood pooling in the corners of the plastic. I cut open a bag and threw the meat onto the flat-top grill. The smell hit us instantly. It was different. It did not smell like beef. It did not smell like pork. It had a sweet, metallic scent to it. It sizzled loudly, the fat rendering down instantly. The smoke that rose up didn't smell appetizing. It smelled like copper. "What is this?" Luis asked, wrinkling his nose and coughing. "Venison? Elk? Bear?" "Maybe," I said, flipping the meat. It turned a pale gray before browning. "Rich people eat weird stuff. Just season it heavily. Use the extra spicy salsa. It'll mask the gamey taste." The sun went down completely. The woods became pitch black. We had the truck's service lights on, creating a little island of safety in the darkness. We were just waiting, the meat keeping warm on the grill. Around 8 p.m., we heard rustling. Not from the road where we came in, but from the dense tree line. I looked out the service window. Shapes were moving in the darkness. Twigs snapping. Leaves crushing. "Guests are here," I said, trying to sound relieved. Showtime. But as they stepped into the light, the relief vanished. They did not look like wedding guests. They did not look like hunters. They were walking slowly, stumbling. They were not talking. There was no laughter, no chatter, no recounting of the day's hunt. They emerged into the light of the food truck. There were about 20 of them. They were covered in mud. Some had their clothes torn. One guy was missing a shoe. They looked exhausted. They looked terrified. Their faces were scratched, their eyes wide and darting around. They lined up at the truck. They did not look at the menu. They kept glancing back at the woods, shivering. The first guy in line looked at me. His eyes were wide, his pupils dilated to the size of coins. He was shaking violently. He did not ask for a taco. He leaned in over the counter, grabbing the metal ledge with dirty fingers. "Is the gate open?" He whispered. I was confused. "What gate?" "The gate on the road," he hissed, sweat dripping down his face. "Did he lock it?" "Did you see the key?" "Tell me you saw the key." Before I could answer, Mr. Blackwood stepped out of the shadows behind the line of people. He was holding a small silver bell. He rang it once. Ding. The sound was piercing in the silence. The people in line flinched. They physically jumped in their skin. They went silent immediately. They stared at the ground, trembling. It was the reaction of a dog that has been beaten too many times. Mr. Blackwood smiled at me from the back of the line. "Feed them," he called out. "They need their energy for the second hunt. They haven't eaten in 3 days." I served the tacos. My hands were shaking, so bad I dropped a tortilla. I scooped the meat onto the shells. The people took the food and ate it like animals. They didn't chew. They just swallowed. They ate fast, desperate, shoving the meat into their mouths. I watched a woman crying silent tears while she chewed, wiping her eyes with a muddy hand. Luis nudged me hard in the ribs. He was pale, the color completely drained from his face. He looked like he was going to throw up. "Look at the meat," he whispered, pointing to the trash bin. "Look at the wrapping." I looked down at the vacuum bag we had thrown into the garbage bin earlier. I hadn't looked closely at it before. There was a label on it. It wasn't a butcher shop label. It was handwritten in black marker. It said, "Subject 42, left thigh, the world spun." I grabbed the counter to keep from falling. I looked at the guests. I looked at their torn clothes. I looked at the fear in their eyes. I looked at Mr. Blackwood, who was watching them eat with a look of pure, twisted pride. This wasn't a party. It was a feeding pen. And we were the ones feeding them. We were cooking. We were cooking something that wasn't an animal. "We have to go," I told Luis. "Now." "The money," Luis stammered. "He hasn't paid us." "Forget the money." I snapped. "We are going to die here. Do you understand? Look at them." We started slamming the service window shut. The metal clang echoed through the clearing. Mr. Blackwood noticed immediately. His smile vanished. He stepped forward, moving unnaturally fast. "You are contracted for 6 hours." He shouted. His voice wasn't polite anymore. It was a roar that echoed off the trees. "Service is not over. We're out of propane." I lied, screaming back, my voice cracking. "We have to get more. We'll be right back." Luis jumped into the driver's seat and gunned the engine. The truck roared to life, sputtering and backfiring. I scrambled to the back to secure the equipment, pots and pans clattering everywhere. As the truck lurched forward, I saw Mr. Blackwood reach into his apron. He pulled out a handgun, a large silver revolver. He fired. Bang! The back window of the truck shattered, spraying glass all over the grill and into the meat. "Go! Go!" I screamed, hitting the deck. Luis slammed on the gas. We tore through the dirt, the heavy truck bouncing violently over roots and rocks. I was on the floor, covering my head with a baking sheet, listening to the suspension groan. We hit the main dirt path, and I saw what the guy meant about the gate. A heavy chain had been pulled across the road between two thick trees. It hadn't been there when we entered Dot. It was thick, rusted steel. "Ram it!" I screamed. "Do not stop. He's coming." Luis didn't hesitate. He floored it. The engine screamed. The front of El Fuego smashed into the chain at 40 miles per hour. Metal screamed. The windshield cracked into a spiderweb. The impact threw me into the deep fryer, splashing hot oil on my arm, burning me, but I didn't even feel it. The chain post ripped out of the soft earth with a sickening tear. We flew through, dragging the chain and the wooden post behind us for a mile, before it finally fell off. We didn't stop. We drove like maniacs down that gravel road, drifting around corners, praying we wouldn't flip. We didn't stop until we hit a gas station on the interstate 30 miles away. We called the police. We sat on the curb, shaking while we waited. We told them everything. They sent a SWAT team and a helicopter out to the coordinates. They found the tent. They found the cooler. But the people were gone. Mr. Blackwood was gone. The police found tire tracks from several heavy vehicles heading deeper into the forest, into land that wasn't on any map. They found traces of blood in the dirt that didn't match any animal. They told us it was probably a cult or some illegal game preserve, but they never found the guests. We sold the truck the next week. I couldn't look at it. I work in insurance now. I sit at a desk. I don't cook, and I can't stand the smell of cooking meat. Every time I smell a barbecue, I think of that label. Subject 42, and I wonder who Subject 43 was. In the summer of 2016, I was home from university and needed cash. My aunt runs a floral shop, and she had this idea to set up pop-up stands on the highway medians near the busy intersections outside of town. It sounds dangerous, but in our area, it was pretty common. You sit on a folding chair under a beach umbrella with buckets of roses and sunflowers, waiting for the red light so people can buy them for their wives or girlfriends on their way home from work. It was easy money, cash in hand, and I just had to sit there and listen to podcasts. I was stationed at the intersection of Route 9 and Sanders Road. It is a weird spot. Route 9 is a busy 4-lane highway, but Sanders Road leads into miles of dense pine forest. During rush hour, it's packed. But once 6 p.m. hits, the traffic vanishes, and it gets incredibly lonely. It's just you, the baking asphalt, and the wall of trees. I had been working there for a month without issue. It was hot, boring work, inhaling exhaust fumes all day, but the tips were good. Then the blue van showed up. It was an old Ford Econoline, the kind without windows in the back. It was painted a matte blue that looked like it was done in a backyard with a spray can uneven, patchy. The windows were tinted dark, illegally dark. The first time I noticed it, the driver honked as he drove past. I waved, thinking he was just being friendly. A lot of truckers did that. The next day, he came by again. This time, the light caught him. He rolled down the window. The driver was a heavyset guy, maybe late 40s, with greasy, thinning hair plastered to his forehead and thick glasses that magnified his eyes, making them look bulging. He bought a single red rose. He didn't smile. He just stared at my chest and handed me a $5 bill. His fingers lingered on my palm a second too long. His skin was rough and surprisingly cold for such a hot day. "Pretty flowers," he grunted. His voice was gravelly wet. "For a pretty girl." I gave a polite customer service laugh and stepped back. "Thanks," I said. He drove off, but I saw him watching me in his side mirror until he disappeared around the bend. He started coming by every day, but he stopped buying flowers. He would just time the lights. He would slow down, rolling to a crawl, and just watch me. If a light was green, he would actually brake to try and catch the yellow. It became a game to him. I would see that blue van coming a mile away, and my stomach would twist into knots. I started dreading that blue speck on the horizon. One Thursday, the heat was unbearable. It was 90 degrees with high humidity. The air felt like soup. My shift ended at 6 p.m., but my boyfriend at the time, Dave, texted me saying he was stuck at work and would be 20 minutes late. I sat on my cooler, sweating, just wanting to go home. Traffic was thinning out. The sun was dipping below the tree line, casting long, creepy shadows across the highway. The road was empty. Then I saw it. The blue van. It was coming down Route 9, moving slowly. My stomach tightened. I looked down at my phone, pretending to be busy, praying for the light to stay green so he would just keep going. Please just drive, I thought. Just keep driving. He didn't. I heard the van slow down. Then I heard the crunch of gravel. He didn't stay in the lane. He pulled off onto the shoulder, right across from my median. He unalived the engine. I looked up. The van was sitting there, idling, about 50 feet away. The driver's door opened, and the guy stepped out. He was wearing a stained white undershirt and baggy cargo pants. He walked to the front, opened the hood of the van, and stared at the engine, scratching his head. I stayed put. I told myself, he is just having car trouble. Do not be paranoid. He broke down. It happens. I wasn't going to offer help. I was a 20-year-old girl, alone on a highway. I stayed glued to my folding chair, gripping my phone. He looked over his shoulder at me. He waved his arm. "Hey!" he shouted. "Hey, miss!" I didn't answer. I pretended I couldn't hear him over the wind. "Do you have any water?" He yelled, pointing at his radiator. "My radiator is overheating. I need water." I had a water bottle. It was half full, but every instinct in my body screamed nitrogen monoxide. It was a primal alarm bell ringing in my head, louder than any siren. "Do not go over there." "Sorry." I yelled back, my voice echoing off the pavement. "I'm all out." He stared at me. He didn't look back at the engine. He slammed the hood shut. It made a loud metallic bang that made me jump. "You sure?" he yelled. He took a step off the shoulder, onto the road. He was walking toward my median. There were no other cars. The light was red, but the intersection was empty. It was dead silent. "I really need some water," he said. He was walking faster now. His gait was heavy, aggressive. He wasn't looking at my cooler. He was looking at me. He reached behind his back, into his waistband. Panic took over. Pure, adrenaline-fueled panic. I didn't think. I didn't grab the cash box. I didn't grab my purse. I turned and ran. I ran across the opposite lanes of Route 9, toward the woods on the other side. "Hey, come here!" He screamed. His voice wasn't groggy or friendly anymore. It was angry. It was a command. I heard his heavy boots hitting the pavement. Slap, slap, slap. He was chasing me. I scrambled up the steep embankment and crashed into the tree line. The brush was thick, thorns tearing at my bare legs, branches whipping my face. I didn't feel the pain. I just felt the terror of knowing he was right behind me. I could hear him crashing through the bush. He was loud, cursing. "You little bitch!" He roared. "Stop running. I just want to talk." I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned. I ducked behind a massive oak tree, sliding down into the dirt, trying to quiet my breathing. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought he would hear it. My phone was clutched in my hand. I dialed 911. My thumb was shaking so bad, I almost dropped it. "I see you, little flower girl." His voice drifted through the trees. He was close, maybe 30 feet away. I could hear him stepping on dry leaves. Crunch, crunch, he was circling. "Come on out," he cooed. "Don't make this hard." I held my breath. I pressed the phone to my ear, whispering my location to the dispatcher. "Route 9, Sanders Road. He's in the woods. He's hunting me." Then I heard a siren. It was faint at first, a distant wail, then louder. A state trooper cruiser was coming down Route 9. I heard the man stop moving. "Lucky," he whispered. It was so close he could have been on the other side of the tree. The word hung in the air. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop a scream. I heard him run back toward the road. I heard the van door slam shut. I heard tires screeching as he peeled away. I stayed behind that tree for another 10 minutes until the dispatcher told me the police were on the scene. I walked out of the woods, shaking, crying, my legs bleeding from the thorns. When I got back to the median, the police were there. The van was gone. They took a report, but without a license plate, they said there wasn't much they could do. They said he was probably gone for good, spooked by the siren. But here is the part that haunts me. Here is the part that makes me wake up sweating in the middle of the night. When I went back to the median to gather my things, the flower buckets were knocked over. The cash box was sitting right there. He hadn't touched the money. He hadn't taken a single dollar. But on my folding chair, the one I had been sitting on just minutes before, there was something sitting on the seat. It was a roll of gray duct tape and a long serrated hunting knife. He hadn't broken down. There was nothing wrong with his radiator. He had pulled over to take me. He had the kit ready in his waistband. If Dave had been 5 minutes later, or if that trooper hadn't driven by at that exact second, I would have been in the back of that blue van. I would have been duct taped and gone, and no one would have ever found me. I never sold flowers again. I don't even like receiving them anymore. Every time I see a blue van, I can feel that cold, rough hand on my palm, and I wonder where he is now, and who he stopped for next. And that's all for tonight. Remember, the most terrifying monsters are the ones that look just like us, the ones who might even live right next door. If these stories serve as a good reminder to trust your instincts, then show your support and like and subscribe. Hitting that bell means you'll get a warning before the next nightmare begins. Sleep well, if you can.